Always comfortable leaning against the wall or sitting in a position which we are more accustomed to. But the blessings of a gathering are attained at the front as opposed to sitting next to the fire exit. Alhamdulillah ta'ala, it's an absolute privilege and honor once again to be here at Raza Masjid in Huddersfield under the supervision and with the du'as and guidance of Hazrat Allama Hamad Raza Sahib Qibla Damat Barakatum Aliyah wal Qudsiyah. As most of you are aware, today is the topic of discussion, this evening is the topic of discussion, is mental health and Islam. I don't intend to take too much of your time, but the fact that we are sat in the masjid, this in itself is a great honor for each and every one of us. For indeed the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Qawa'idu fil masjidi min al-ibadah. The sitting in the masjid is worship, is ibadah. And then to be sitting in a gathering where the remembrance of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is taking place, no doubt. This leads to great sharaf in the dunya and in the akhirah as well. Allah tabarak wa ta'ala grant me the tawfiq to speak the truth. Allah Almighty grant you the tawfiq to listen to the truth. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيِّ الْعَظِيمِ. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah الذي أبدع الأفلاك والأرضين والصلاة والسلام على من كان نبيا وآدم بين الماء والطين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين. آمنت بالله صدق الله مولانا العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاكرين والشاهدين والحمد لله رب العالمين. ببركة إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. درود شریف اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا ومولانا محمد عبدك ورسولك ونبيك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. Each and every one of you join in as-salatu was-salamu alayka ya sayyidi ya Rasulallah wa ala alika wa ashabika ya sayyidi ya Habiballah. As-salatu was-salamu alayka ya sayyidi ya Rasulallah wa ala alika wa ashabika ya sayyidi ya rahmatan lil alameen. One more time, please, Zaban Khamosh Nalehi. As-salatu was-salamu alayka ya sayyidi ya Rasulallah وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا سيدي يا خاتم النبيين. الله رب محمد صلى عليه وسلم نحن عباد محمد صلى عليه وسلم. Once again, Honorable and Respectable Imam al-Khatib Masjid Hada, Muhtaram al-Maqam Izzat Ma'am Hazrat Allama Hafiz Hamad Raza Sahib Damat Barakatum Aliyah wal Qudsiyah, honorable and respectable elders, brothers and sisters, lovable youngsters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For this evening's discussion on mental health and Islam, there are three parts. How many parts? Three parts to the discussion. The first is in relation to what is mental health. The second part is in relation to what are the common causes of mental health. And the third part of the discussion in the time that we have is in relation to the cures in light of Quran and Sunnah to mental health. So there are how many parts to this evening's discussion? 3. Somebody said 2. Shabash. Some people say, Imam sir, you keep repeating the same points again and again. Whereas the Arabs have this proverb, right? Al-ilmu bit-takrar. Al-ilmu bit-takrar. That knowledge is gained by way of repetition. And you'll find these narrations in the books of Shama'il, that when the Prophet ﷺ would deliver the wa'az or nasihat to the Sahaba Ikram, often the Prophet ﷺ would repeat things 3 times. How many times? There's that number again. 3 is sunnah generally, and this is from amongst the ways of the Rasul Akram sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the discussion for this evening is of 3 parts. So the first part in relation to what is mental health, by way of introduction as well, that as Ashraful Makhluqat, we are the greatest of Allah Almighty's creation. لَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. As human beings, there are 2 parts to our that and our being, our essence. The first is in relation to physical health, and the second is in relation to mental health. Both have to be balanced, and there needs to be i'tidal, equilibrium between physical and mental health in order to live a healthy and balanced life. And in order to gain guidance on this, for us as Muslims, we have first and foremost the Book of Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That book in which there is no doubt, and it is that book in which there is guidance for the righteous and the pious, the God-fearing. And alongside the Book of Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala, we have the ta'limat and the namuna, the dhat of Rasul Akram sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Isi Quran mein Allah Almighty says, famous verse, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Surah number 33, verse number 21. Ta'qeed ke saath, most certainly, indeed, you have the perfect role model and the ideal example to follow in the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. और ये मुतलक़न एक statement है, generic, a means of guidance for us, a reminder. فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And reminders are no doubt beneficial for the believers, and specifically related to the topic at hand as well. So for every human being there are 2 parts. You've got the physical and you've got the mental. You can also say psychological. So the discussion itself is touched upon indirectly in the verses of the Quran. Over the next half an hour or so, we'll delve into some of them verses. And then, of course, through the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Nobody went through more difficulties and hardships than Rasulullah ﷺ. But the Nabi ﷺ himself said, Hadith Shif ka mafhum, that all of the Anbiya wal Mursaleen were tested, but I, the son of Abdullah, was tested more than the rest of the Anbiya wal Mursaleen. And we find, and we'll touch upon this later, that despite these tests and these imtihanat, nobody was more patient than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sahaba Ikram said that nobody smiled more than Tajdar Madina Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, for you and me as Muslims, it's not all doom and gloom. It's important that we come back to the Book of Allah and we come back to the ta'limat of Tajdar Madina Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why often I remind myself and those who are willing to listen that we are living in difficult and testing times. There is a need now more so than ever before to make our connection, our nisbat, our ta'alluq firm with the Quran and with Sahib al-Quran, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If I was to, with ijazah, just very quickly touch upon this issue as well, that over the weekend that has just passed, one incident in Sweden, one incident in the Netherlands, where far-right extremists were responsible for burning copies of the Quran. Some of you may be aware of this. Some of you might not be aware of this. If you have this knowledge, then the question is, as I posed the question to our Muqtadis on Friday's sermon as well, now what are we going to do? Though we are not promoting and inciting violence in any way, but come as come, we have our social media accounts, we have an opportunity to raise our voices, to raise awareness. Our Quran is our honor, our Prophet is our honor. But sadly and unfortunately, we find that many of our youngsters who are disconnected from the Quran and the Zat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a need for us to turn back to Quran and Sunnah. So here written that mental health is our emotional, psychological and social well-being. World Health Organization statistic pre-COVID, November 2019, worldwide statistic, the 379 million people around the world suffered from mental health issues. It could be something as trivial as anxiety, which then leads to panic attacks. It could be related to, again, the psyche of the mind, the state of the heart, which then leads to depression. Or, worst case scenario, these issues then lead to someone taking their own life. This was only a month ago in Bradford, 1 month exactly to the day, where we offered the Salatul Janazah of a 28-year-old youngster who took his life in prison. Wajah kya? Mental health issues. What are the causes of that? We're going to come to that in the second part of our discussion. So I've written here, and I said it on that occasion as well. Janazah was after Salatul Jumu'ah, Masjid Parisi, that we often consider this subject to be a taboo subject. If somebody comes to us, and this is also a point worth noting, that Alhamdulillah, A'imma Hazrat, Ulama Ikram, Maulvi Hazrat, they often have ilm of what is in Quran and Sunnah, but they don't often have the cures to our spiritual illnesses. Har Maulvi ta Hakim ta nina. Not every scholar is in a position to give you spiritual guidance. So often our ulama, myself included, we are not trained. We certainly are not educated in this particular field. This is why if I was to come to the conclusion right at the beginning of the discussion, if someone is suffering from mental health issues, either those who are listening or you might be aware of someone in your circle of friends or within your family, then it's important that you seek professional help for them. This is available, whether it's Huddersfield, Bradford, from north to south, around the country. But again, this is often a subject which is dismissed, brushed under the carpet, and we turn a blind eye to it. But if somebody comes to us and says, Ji, Imam Sahab, depression hai ji, or some child tells their mother or father, Ji, I'm hearing voices in my head, or this is what's happening, my psychological and emotional well-being and balance is not as it should be, then we'll often dismiss this as Jadoo hai ji. You know, Jadoo hai ji. That is an issue related to black magic, or like this evil spirits. Or if that person isn't practicing their deen, their religion, then we'll throw it back in their face and say, oh, tu namaz bhi na karna, tu Qur'an ki tilawat bhi na karna. And because you're not religious enough, this is why you are experiencing what you're experiencing. There is no doubt. Every imtihan, every test is from Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Nobody's dismissing that. No doubt every imtihan is from Allah Almighty. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن But from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, we also are aware that there is no disease, no illness that Allah Almighty has created, except that Allah has created its treatment and ilaj as well. एक तरफ दुरुस्त है जिंदगी, एक इम्तिहान है, it's a test from Allah Almighty. And you will be tested in terms of your wealth, in terms of your health, in terms of your children, in terms of good and bad. But there's got to be a cure to that illness. We're going to come to that. So this often then leads to this dismissive attitude. And again, ignoring the problem. And it's not just related to mental health. Some issues and problems stare us in the face. Drugs or illicit relationship. Youngsters leaving Islam. Hazrat, पिछले हफ्ते ओल्डम की बात, साथ साथ ये भी बयान करने हैं, 10 girls कॉपिस में, कॉपिस मस्जिद का नाम है ना, लेना चाहे क्यों रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही है ना, इन्हों का दिलोला पीला, कॉपिस ओल्डम, 10 girls, Muslim girls left Islam and they changed their gender as well. But if we discuss these issues, Maulana Sahib member per bhi speaker gal karan, Imam Sahib as an outsider comes in and talks about these problems, we'll say, oh ji, nobody just says it from themselves. These are issues and problems affecting our youth. And those who attended our weekly classes before Rabiul Awwal Sharif, you will know that we highlighted this pretty much every week. The challenges that our youth and our Nojawan Nasl face at this moment in time, in the schools and colleges and universities. That's before we even mention social media, so on and so forth. And this often happens. Mental health issues develop from our youngsters looking at those who they consider to be superior. And in turn they feel inferior. The Flana Tokoji, Agadi Clareji, Flana Tokoji, celebrity culture, right? And we expose our youth to this, our children. No matter how old they are, bas ji smartphone laprai hone, tablet di hone, TV lai hone, or you kya idea ni bacche ni tarbiyat ho rahi, or we just want our children to be quiet. No. You're exposing them to these things. They have the world at their fingertips. And when they see certain celebrities and certain individuals in our community as well, then they aspire to be like them. This is often the case. We were with the West Yorkshire Police yesterday because of our work in the community in Bradford during the bonfire period. They recognized this work and presented some certificates, so on and so forth. Bandi, a police officer, gave a presentation as well. So, guftagoo ADC, counselor in modules and ye wo jis rahi hai. And somebody made this observation. Asapni gal karne as our own community, Pakistani community, Muslim community, that often if you ask a youngster today that what do you want to be, what is your ambition, what type of job do you want, and they often aspire to be, and they will say that I want to be a drug dealer. But if you mention the issue of drugs in the masjid, Hazrat, मेरा का अपना एक्सपीरियंस है ना, नहीं इंतजामिया ने भी अक्सर अवाम भी आसी और ये मौलवी ना काम में सिर्फ ये वुजू के मसाइल और नमाज के फराइज बयान करना नहीं, and this is also again part of the issue and problem. So we have to accept that there is a problem before we can present some sort of solution. Would you agree? Yes, no? And then often is the case that if we diagnose that person as having jadoo or black magic, sihr has been done upon them, फिर ऐसा इस तरीके नाल कोई माजरत के साथ पिछले बारी भी आहले सन इमाम साहब थोड़े सख्त बोले ना, तो अगले बारी भी आहो जी वो, लेकिन unfortunately these things have to be said. I say unfortunately because these problems occur. That we end up going to fraudsters and charlatans who pretend to be spiritual healers. Baba hoya ji koi is an inverted commas, peer hoya ji, spiritual healer hoya ji. जो सच्चे सुच्चे पीर ना उन्होंने खिलाफ ना बोल रहे हैं ना, वो बासुए गल है recording होई है, and people don't look at what's been said before ना, मा खबर देखने ना, मा बाद सुनने, बस जी पीछे पीर है और जी इमाम साहब फिर पीर ने खिलाफ नहीं, जो सच्चे सुच्चे पीर ना हमारे सर के ताजन, जिनका अकीदा दुरुस्त है, और जो तालीमात हुजूर गौस पाक शहंशाह बगदाद अपनाने ना वो हमारे सर के ताज यार. Lekin again, this is an issue and problem, is it not? And then often they exploit those who are victims, be it for financial favors. And now we hear of sisters who are being sexually exploited by these so-called spiritual healers. And if you don't address the issue there, things will carry on. ऐसे भी पीने ही मनने यार, ऐसे ही मौलिया की मनने यार, रूहानियत, तसव्वुफ, तज़किया, ihsan. What is being represented in regards to this beautiful science and aspect of our deen by the certain individuals, fraudsters and charlatans, is not the reality of how it should be. So this is a word of caution, especially for my sisters who are listening, those who are sitting baparda in the masjid, those who are watching live, that if you were to go to some sort of a spiritual healer, you should always go with your mahram. Yes, no? Parshan nazar aale khair yaar, main koi gal hi nahi ki thi. This is nasiha, advice for you. Yes? So if your sisters, your daughters, your mothers are going to go to see us, they should never see them alone. There should be a mahram at all times with them. Dusri gal ye hai that if that person asks you for money, first installment £500, second installment £1,000, तावीज़ हो गया जी 1500 पौन बसता है, फूक और चाहा पाने बसता जी फलाना जो कुछ है जिस लगे. And again disclaimer, I am not targeting anyone here. जो कुछ है उसके सामने है ना, कोई गल छपी तो नहीं ना, सोशल मीडिया का दौर है, बस वो क्या है जी, अंधी अवाम, blind leading the blind, ignorant leading the ignorant. Jahal murakkab ka daur hai na. The many of us are ignorant of the fact that we are ignorant. I mean, we point out to somebody that, what are you doing? What's all this? What's all this? You don't know Imam sir. Sure. Ajeeb baat hai yaar. What's wrong is wrong. What contradicts the Sharia contradicts the Sharia. It doesn't matter if their father may have been a righteous peer, or righteous waliullah, or their grandfather, or whatever it may be. So word of caution here. It's very important that we are careful when it comes to finding the solutions to these problems. Rather than going for an easy fix, अपने मन में डूबो ना, तेरे दिल तो है सनम आशिना, तुझे क्या मिलेगा नमाज में? It's easy to find a quick solution
वैसे माइक्रोवेव का दौर है ना, put in a meal, press 3 minutes of basji, ping, after 3 minutes your meal is ready. असल इसराइल जाने आता when it comes to the deen आम बात हो रही है, आम बात हो रही है, इल्ला माशाल्लाह भी है ना. But we look for quick solution जी, ना से नमाज पढ़ने, ना रोजे रखने, ना ज़कात देने, ना हज पर जाने, ना रिज़्क़ हलाल कमाने, खुद इस तरीके ना हराम कमाने, हराम खाने, बच्चे की भी खवाने. We said this 2 months ago, बड़ी यार में मौके पर. तो विवादिया हो, ये परेशानी है, वो परेशानी है, ये मसला है, वो मसला है, और ये कोई भूख मारो, कोई चामा बाग, कोई ताबीज देखो यार. We're not we're not against those things, but be careful who you go to. अपनी कोई तहकीक करो ना. When it comes to your physical health, which is what we were touching upon earlier, you won't go to any person who claims to be a doctor. ये क्या? Well, if we research also, where are your certificates? What's your qualification? Where have you studied? What medical school did you acquire this knowledge? But when it comes to ruhani ilaj, when it comes to cures to our spiritual illnesses, this was a brief introduction in relation to what is classed as mental health. So to again define this very quickly, without going into too much of a definition, mental health is our emotional, psychological and social well-being. Basically the state of the mind and the heart. Both the mind and the heart are linked with the ruh. Yes. So we can go into that aspect of the discussion as well. नफ्स अम्मारा और नफ्स लवामा और नफ्स मुतमईना as well. उस तरफ भी ऐसा जा सकते हैं, लेकिन we are short on time as it is. So the discussion then, if we accept that there is a problem, and those who are in attendance, you accept that this is a problem? By show of hands. मैं चंदा तना मंगना, put your hands up. Ji, do we accept that mental health is an issue and a problem in our communities? Yes. We may know of people who have suffered it ourselves. Dare I say, we ourselves may have gone through it. But nevertheless, once we accept that there is a problem in relation to mental health, then we have to go to the root of the problem. What are the causes of mental health? And I've written here 3, again, ikhtisar ke saath. Number 1, the first possible cause of mental health is stress. क्या? Stress. ये होना ना? आज साहब आज परेशान नजर आए हो, बास जी इमाम साहब ना पूछो. कोई आने की बच्चे नहीं परेशानी है, कोई आने माल दौलत नहीं परेशानी है. वैसे we're going through a cost of living crisis, right? Gas and electricity bills are through the roof. Many of us are struggling to make ends meet. So much so that I know Muslims now, not just Bradford, nationwide ki baat hai, who are relying and who are dependent upon food banks and handouts as well. Aur ye bhi shan ka maqam hai na, that often they go towards non-Muslims, apart from a few of our masajid like Madni Masjid in Halifax, local, and 1 or 2 other places as well, that actually take the initiative to put some sort of a food bank in place so that our Muslims are not embarrassed and shameful of going towards non-Muslims. But often they do tend towards non-Muslims. And then the iman begins to weaken. The iman begins to weaken. So rather than supporting the one who is stressful, rather than asking that person, how are you, how is your day? What do they say? A smile can take the anxieties and worries of next man away from him. लेकिन ऐसा बात इस्लाम में ना कोई मुस्कुराने या एक आम बात हो रही है, not just you, but a few people. Bradford are worse than you. आजकल बात ये अखलाक इस्लाम नहीं हो रहा. वो पहले कोविड में स्टार्ट करने से ना. This goes back to the point that I'm trying to illustrate, that we are distant from our deen. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fis silmi kaffa. Muhtaram Chote Hafsa was reading a part of that verse, or in another maqam in Surah Al-Baqarah mein hai na, that all those of you who believe enter into your religion wholeheartedly. It's not a part-time occupation that when you feel like it, you put on the garbs and the clothing of a religious person. जैसे तुसा जुमे के दिन पर नजर रखने हो, जा रमजान शरीफ पर नजर रखने हो, And you might say, Imam, who are you to judge? Acha. So you're struggling to comprehend that Imam Sahib is judging. And you're perfectly comfortable with the fact that Allah Almighty will judge you. These ahkam and these umur, orders and rulings from Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala are there for a reason. We were talking about keeping this balance and equilibrium in our lives. If you follow the Quran to the letter, and you follow and implement the ta'limat of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to the letter, like we were illustrating earlier on, that for us as Muslims, our ultimate guide is the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah. Maybe these issues and problems and stresses that we have will not be as much. But har banda apni marzi karna na. We cherry pick of the deen what suits us, we leave what doesn't suit us. And there is this constant tussle between culture and religion. I mentioned this before, Ghaliban, on this stage. You only have to look at the way we conduct our weddings. Yahi hai na? Ek chota sa misal pesh karne hai ya. We talk about stress, huh? If you begin to do bagawat against the deen of Allah Almighty, bagawat samjho jaye koi sakht lafaz hai. English, if you begin to contradict and go against Quran and Sunnah, then فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ. Then wait for the command of Allah Almighty to come down. It's simple. The blueprint to live a very successful life where your physical and mental health is always in balance is that you follow the teachings of Islam. Then there is no stress. Then there is no depression. Then there is no anxiety and hardship. And this goes hand in hand with a verse from the Quran where Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala mentions in Surah Taha, Surah number 20, verse number 124. وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً دَنْقًا. That Allah Almighty says what? That whoever turns away from my reminder and whoever turns away from my dhikr and remembrance, then that person will no doubt live a strained life, a stressful life. So there is a wisdom behind praying 5 times a day. There is a wisdom in waking up and reading your dua, and before going to sleep and reading the whole day and night. Yahi na Quran mein baar zikr ho raha hai. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira wa sabbihuhu bukratan wa asila. That ay iman walo, Allah ka dhikr kathrat ke saath karo. Remember Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala in abundance. Remember Allah in the morning and remember Allah in the evening. But again, hand on heart, how many of us can say we actually do this? How many of us say that we can, or how many of us are confident in saying that we pray 5 times a day? That we do what is expected of us? That if you don't do what's expected of you, and you live a life contrary to Quran and Sunnah, which then disturbs this inner nature of peace and harmony in us, then this will of course lead to stress. And this stress now has also led to this weakness of Iman. Weakness of Iman has led to this feeling amongst some of us that we have become reliant upon those other than Allah. I'm talking about the concept of tawakkul here. Tawakkul on Allah. Isn't this the case? Many of us are turning towards earning rizq haram just to make ends meet. That we don't have that level of trust and reliance and tawakkul in Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala, like our pious predecessors. So this is a point of reflection for you and me. That what is our threshold when it comes to placing our trust in Allah? वो आपने ज़बान में क्या है जी? पीर वड्डा दा यकीन वड्डा. Ajkal, if you were to do a survey and ask our people, we should place our trust in Allah. Sahaba Ikram's trust in Allah Almighty was such that even if they ran out of the basic necessities and provisions in their home, they would turn to Allah Almighty and ask Allah for guidance. They would place their reliance and trust in Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. But what do? We place our trust and reliance in the people, and the people no doubt let us down. We place our trust and reliance in mal and daulat, and how much wealth are you going to accumulate? Wahi hadith sharif ka mafhum hai na, that the son of Adam has one valley full of gold, and he's never content. he desires a second body full of gold. This is why be content with what you have. What you have is what has been written and decreed for you by Allah. There is no one that can take this away from you. And again, you might say, everyone knows this. Yes, everyone knows this, but we need to be reminded, especially in these difficult and testing times. So the first cause of mental health is stress. Very quickly, number 2 I've written here, major depressive disorder, which is linked to the first point, if you think about it. This feeling of hopelessness and despair. But what does Allah say in the Quran? La taqnatu min rahmatillah. And we have this amongst our youth today, because of the sins that we commit, again disturbing this inner peace within us, that some, as I've already alluded to, turning towards drugs in order to get this inner contentment, others turning towards women in order to gain this satisfaction. But what does Allah say in the Quran? Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. That if you want this inner peace and tranquility, and you want your mental and psychological frame of mind to be full of peace and harmony, then spend your days and nights in the dhikr of Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. Lekin us taraf dhyan tawajjuh hi koni. We have a gathering in the masjid. Pehle ye hona si ji English speaker koni, ji English speaker koni. On English speaker mein apni gal na karna. Koi gila nahi. Alhamdulillah, on a Friday evening, to have 30-40 brothers sat here and to have our sister sitting by Parda as well is a fantastic achievement. Well done to the Intizamiya and bil khusus brother Irfan under the guidance of Hazrat Allama Qibla Sahab for putting this together. But this is again, some of these gatherings are just a means of quick injection. These are COVID injections. Nasle case लाने वास्ते हैं. हम बार-बार मैसेज भेजें जी बूस्टर लाओ. तो हम वो लोग थोड़े जे होश में चाहिए ना बूस्टर लाना तो ना कोई क्या जाना. तो ये भी सब these gatherings are a means of boosting our iman. This is why if you want to find true inner peace, yes, then the best place to do so is the house of Allah. The house of Allah. وهذه شريف أنا صحيح مسلم شريف में أحب البلاد إلى الله تعالى مساجدها وأبغض البلاد إلى الله تعالى أسواقها أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said what? That the most beloved of places in Allah, to Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala, are the houses of Allah. These are our spiritual rehabilitation clinics. Spiritual rehabilitation clinics. Not a social club, I'm sorry to say. और किसी मस्जिद पर तांजनी इनाबादी पे बोला बाना कोई कमेटी वाले भी सेंसिटिव है आजकल कम्युनिटी भी बड़ी सेंसिटिव है ना मैं आम गाल करना यार इस मस्जिद निकाल ना करना ठीक है ये भी डिस्क्लेमर है but what do we find often as youngsters when we come to the masjid and there are a few babe are sat together वो gossiping slandering ये कुछ ही होना यार जब politics पर गुफ्तगू करने or they're talking about PTI and Noon League or whatever it may be or they're talking about the T20 World Cup. This is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam बार-बार हज़रत की मौजूदगी में और हमारी खुशकिस्मती हज़रत मौजूद है आज सबक सुनाने ना that इस तरीके नाल बार-बार नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम reprimand and warn you and me of the dangers of talking about worldly affairs in the houses of Allah. यही कहा ना. That in one narration, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said what? That the one who talks about worldly affairs in the masjid, his good deeds are wasted, just as fire burns wood. Har kisam di ghibat chugli masjid mein ji karne hai na. Ye gal hai. Aapko ye na baat to sahi postmortem bhi karo. And then what did Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said? The worst of places. To Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala are the marketplace. Where we find many of our youngsters spending their days and nights. The Sunday, unfortunately, I speak again generally here, nationwide issue, that we find more youngsters in the clubs and pubs and shisha lounges than we do in the houses of Allah. And those very same youngsters who are now becoming mentally unstable because they're looking for something, they're searching for something. Sometimes they turn to the houses of Allah. And again, I speak generally here, but they find that they are put off because of the politics in the masjid, because of the fact that maybe they can't relate to the Imam Sahib of the masjid. because of what I've already alluded to, that some individuals have done qabza upon the masjid. Or the masjid they'll find that 5 minutes before the jama'at is open and 5 minutes after the prayer is closed. Though the masjid should be the hub of the community, look at Masjid Nabi Sharif. There was no greater healer and no greater psychologist. No greater psychologist than Rasulullah. Whatever issue, whatever problem, no matter how small or big, that the Sahaba Ikram would have, Ahlul Madinah would have, who would they go to? They would go to Rasulullah. They would go to Masjid Nabi Sharif. But unfortunately, what do we find with our masajid? So this is a point of reflection for us. So do not despair in the mercy of Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. No matter how many sins you've committed, it could be as tall as the mountains and as vast as the oceans. If you turn back to Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala, once with sincerity, Allah Almighty will forgive all of your sins. You know that famous narration of the man who killed 99 people, right? What happened? One second. Gee? Well, you missed the whole narration, not to the end, yes. Allahu Akbar. Drushi bar Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yes? So the man who killed 99 people, Bator Ishara, went to an average, normal worshipper, Abid, said to him that the one who had no knowledge, between the one who has knowledge and doesn't have knowledge, says to him, that I've killed how many people? 99. Will Allah forgive me? And that person was just a normal worshipper. He goes, no, it's not possible. You've killed 99 people, Allah won't forgive you. So he kills him and makes it a century. Century is complete. Then he continues his journey, again searching for that inner peace. Inner peace. This is the month of Rajab al-Murajab, right? And this is the month of istighfar. This is the month of turning back to Allah Almighty. This is the month of asking Allah Almighty for forgiveness. This is the month of rebuilding them bridges that we have burned through our own ghaflat and heedlessness and our own ma'siyah and sins that we've committed over the last year, since Ramadan. Do not despair, O believers. Young brothers and sisters, do not despair in the mercy of Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. And then very quickly he asks that alim, the second person he gets to, I've killed how many people now? 100 people. Will Allah forgive me? That alim who had knowledge said to him, gave him hope. Ye ulama ka kaam hai na. Some ulama, I'm sorry to say, kaam baat ho rahi hai. That when they come across some youngster who's committed wrong, bas ji, that's it. You're destined for the hellfire. They don't give that person any hope. They don't embrace them. They don't welcome them. And they don't lead by example. Again, I generalize here. In every field there's some sort of weakness. But anyway, that alim gave this individual hope, which is what we're talking about. Gave him hope that don't despair. Allah will forgive you, even though you killed 100 people. But what you need to do is you need to go to such and such a place where the men of Allah, Rijalullah, the friends of Allah are gathered. So he starts his journey towards them. But when making this journey, or whilst on this journey, he dies. Very quickly, then you know what happens. The angels measure the land, and it transpires he's actually closer to where he came from as opposed to where he's going. So Allah Almighty made the angels move his body. Never despair in the mercy of Allah Almighty, no matter how many sins you have committed. And again, this goes back to social media. The dangers and ills of social media. A challenge that our previous generations didn't face. That many of our youngsters again feel this inferiority complex. That sometimes they see people who are on a religious vibe and they think, oh, we can't reach that person. And as I've already alluded to on other occasions, they look at those who are drowned in the ghaflat and heedlessness of the dunya and they begin to aspire towards being like them. This is why finding a balance and equilibrium between the two, not going towards one extreme or the other. Khairul umuri awsatuha. Nabi said the best of ways is the middle way. Yahi dua mangna namaz hai. Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Oh Allah, guide us to the straight path. So this is why parents in particular, if your children are under the age of 18, I would say, it is your duty and responsibility to monitor and supervise the social media accounts of your children. درست نصیحت. یہ نہیں بس فون اپلائی ہو پن دی ہو بچے جانے تو بچے نے کم جانے نہیں جانے. We have to rise to the challenges. So major depressive disorder. And then the third cause of mental health issue before we come towards some sort of a khulasa and conclusion. I've written here many causes and many asbab and reasons, but here I've written marital issues. This is becoming an increasingly worrying time for our youngsters. That we seem to spend 30, 40, 50,000 pounds on a few days of the wedding. Very little investment is actually made in the marriage itself. This is why 2023 ki baat hai na, that we find that divorce is on the increase, talaq is on the increase, nikah is on the decrease. That we live in a society today where it's cheaper to commit zina as opposed to getting married and fulfilling the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we find that many of our youngsters now getting into their early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s. Shadi hoyi hai ji, niya jani hoyi. Still waiting, still preparing myself. Right, we're going for jihad, I'm still preparing myself. I'm not financially stable yet. I can't provide for myself. How am I going to provide for her? And then often we find, I'm addressing my sisters here. This isn't because I've got a chip on my shoulder. But our sisters, lack of patience, lack of tolerance. They're not even equivalent to our parents, our mothers. But the sisters of today, no tahammul, no forbearance, no sabr. Bas ji foreign parda uthai unne. This is why Quran says, وَهُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. Surah Al-Baqarah mein hai na. Allah Almighty gives the analogy of clothing to explain the relationship between a husband and wife. And here first Allah addresses the women, that you are a garment for them. And the women are a garment for the husband. The wife is a garment for the husband. And the husband is a garment for the wife. Rather than exposing one another's shortcomings, which then in turn causes mental health issues, you should put a parda over your husband's shortcomings. I'm not advocating that those husbands who are violent and who are responsible for domestic abuse, that our sisters should suffer in silence. That's not what I'm advocating. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the small things. The badashi koni, sabari koni, and we become a burden upon our newly wedded husband. It takes time to build this understanding. It takes years. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you do it the halal way. So this is why psychological abuse, which often leads to mental issues, physical abuse that I've already alluded to and just mentioned, and domestic violence is at an all-time high. Yet the BBC News par bhi baqaida, during the COVID, the number of physical abuse cases, violent and domestic violence in the homes increased during COVID. So remember, we as Muslims, as men, we are not allowed to, we are not permitted to raise our hands to our women. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, ibtidai guftugu mein, Quran and Sunnah for you and me is a means of guidance. This is why Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself said, what? Taraktu fikum amrayn. لم تدلوا ما مسكتم بهما كتاب الله وسنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم. Muwatta Imam Malik Sharif ki riwayat hai, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, I've left you two things. If you hold on to them, you will never go astray. Number one is the book of Allah. Number two is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why before your children get married, it's really that you spend some time with the local imam. Tell Imam Sahib that you teach my daughter her rights and hukuk, and you teach her husband to be his rights and hukuk as well. Not the self-made rights that we read on Google. We deal with these cases, yeah? One particular sister, I read on Google that these are my rights. I read on Google that these are my rights. Nahi, it's what Quran and Sunnah says. So we condemn all forms of physical violence, and those sisters who are suffering in silence, tell a member of your family, involve your elders, involve those people who are in a position to help you. Don't suffer in silence. Don't suffer in silence. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never raised his hands, as I was about to say. Never raised his hand to any of his azwaj mutahharat. 11 of them in total. Wa azwajuhu ummahatuhum. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's pure wives, they are the mothers of the believers. Yes, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never raised his hands. So you claim to follow the sunnah, you keep the sunnah, and then on the other hand, behind closed doors, this is what you do. This shouldn't be the case. Car share tabar bili, bar logan ne saamne Baba ji Chaudhary sahab piche behind closed doors what's happening. You might say, okay, I can get away with it because next man doesn't know or he's not aware, but Allah is watching. Innahu alimum bidhati sudur. Allah Almighty is fully aware of what is in the depths of our hearts. So we very quickly, the last 40 minutes or so, touched upon what is mental health, how this is a subject which is often overlooked, a taboo subject, and how we should overcome these misconceptions rather than dismissing it as evil spirits and that person is not religious enough. We should tackle the issue and the problem. One of the ways of tackling the issue and problem is going back to the root causes, and we touched upon with a bit of wazahat on them 3 main root causes that I feel are the case. We come towards the last part of the discussion. Very quickly, touch and go. I've already alluded to some of these solutions to this problem, but we'll ikhtisar ke saath khulasa pesh karne. I mentioned the hadith sheet earlier, I'll say it again. There is no disease that Allah Almighty has created except Allah has created its treatment, its ilaj. Yes? So for every illness there is some sort of cure. And to this particular illness of mental health, it is an illness. There's nothing to be shy of, or you can't run away from the fact that it is. Aside from the fact that I alluded to earlier on, seeking professional help, there are 3 things that I've written here very quickly. Number 1 is spiritual reliance. Yes, that Islam offers a spiritual sanctuary for Muslims to live a peaceful life. We've touched upon this, right? That the most safest place and a spiritual rehabilitation center for you and me are the houses of Allah. And if your own local masjid, again I generalize here, if your own local masjid unfortunately is not as welcoming, then look for that masjid of Sahihul Aqidah where you can go and find this inner peace and contentment. And rather than our youngsters booking holidays to Dubai, Morocco, not the Islamic parts of Morocco, Agadir and Casablanca, the Dua Kyan Dubai to Ilava, where do our youngsters go mainly? Turkey, the Cholo, Rajkar, Mashallah, Istanbul, Konya, Due Pasa, Antalya. Rather than booking your holidays to these places, honeymoon, honeymoon. Ask your dad if you were on a honeymoon. Honeymoon, honeymoon very quickly becomes something else. So I don't compromise on your principles. Don't compromise on your deen. If you're reading in between the lines, I've touched upon these points already. Enter into the Islam wholeheartedly, into the religion, into the deen, into Islam or wholeheartedly. Live and breathe Islam. Then you won't have these issues and problems, aside from it being a test from Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. So as I was about to give this nasiha and advice, rather than booking your holidays to these Muslim lands where non-Muslim things happen, book your holidays for a trip to Al-Madinatul Munawwarah. You'll find this in a spiritual reliance. Makkatul Mukarrama, Baghdad Sharif ho gaya ji, Palestine jaisa agre mahine ja raha, thoda jo chota kaafla bhi naal jayega ji, maise milya ji. This is something that we should look to do. Spend your money wisely. Very quickly, number 2, and we've already alluded to this. We're wrapping up now. The role of patience. Kya? Sabr. Innama sabru inda sadmatil ula. Yeah, part of a bigger narration in Sahih Muslim Sharif, Riyadh Salihin mein hai na, that again, this can be a cause for mental health issues. That if a parent loses one of their children, is to badi kari imtihan. That a father or mother loses their child, and this happened once in the time of the Prophet many times, or on this occasion. Very quickly, a woman lost her son, and she was standing and crying profusely over her son's grave. Nabi Sallallahu walked past and said to her, be patient, sabr karo. She didn't know it was the Prophet Sallallahu. She lashed out and retaliated and said, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know what I'm going through. Nabi Sallallahu didn't react in a negative way, like you and me may have reacted. But Tajdani Medina quietly walked away. An onlooker then quickly went to that woman and said, don't you know that was the best of creation, though Jahan ki wali, rahmatan lil alamin. Very quickly she became full of anxiety and fear. She went to the Hujra Mubarak of Nabi Sallallahu, knocked on the door, behind the parda. She said, Ya Rasulullah, I didn't know it was you. Forgive me. I ask for your forgiveness. That's when Nabi Sallallahu said these words. Innama sabru inda sadmatil ula. The patience is at the beginning of the trial and tribulation. These are the translation, or this is the translation of these words. Patience is at the beginning of the trial and tribulation. Patience isn't changa gussa kadita, pande panita, फिर चुप चुप दे बीच जाता हो जाए सबरा सबरा ले. मैं तो कुछ आख्या ही नहीं. मैं तो कुछ आख्या ही नहीं. नहीं यार, ये तनिक सब्र के बेवकूफी है. Sabr is at the beginning of the trial and tribulation. Whether it's in the masjid, whether it's in the home, whether it's in the workplace. Over 200 verses of the Quran related to sabr and patience. Like the verse that I recited in the khutbah that you're all familiar with, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 153. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Isti'ana, seeking help from other than Allah. You can't seek help from anything other than Allah. Acha? Then where would you put this verse of the Quran? Yayyina wasila, isti'ana. Am I making sense here? Allah Almighty Himself is saying what? All those of you who believe, seek help, seek assistance. Through what? First and foremost, sabr, then salah. ऐसा क्या है कि नमाज तो सारे में परेशानियां पूरे नमाज पढ़ना दुरुस्त है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह. Reading your salah is the coolness to the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As-salatu mi'rajul mu'min, virtues and fada'il and excellences upon excellences regarding the salah. Lekin salah to pehle, what does Allah say? Seek patience or seek assistance through patience. We're not willing to be patient. Har banda wants to show their macho-ness. Gussa. La taghdab. Man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Awsani ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Advise me, O Prophet of Allah. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, do not get angry. Again he said, Ya Rasulullah, advise me. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not get angry. Ya Rasulullah, advise me. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the third time said, do not get angry. La taghdab. Aisa kya karne hai ji? Aksar ye hai, Hazrat will have his own experiences. Somebody will ring us, usually the man. Imam साहब क्या है जी, ठीक है, क्या मसला, और जी मैं तलाक दी हो यार, तो मैं गुस्से में था, मैं कोई खुशी तो नहीं ना तलाक देना, जाहिर है मैं गुस्से में सोना, तो गुस्सा हराम है इस्लाम में. This is why if you are full of anger, which then leads to mental health issues, you begin to get paranoid, you begin to think, you waswisu fi sudurin nas, and the shaitan plays his part, and there's many more aspects to the discussion as well. Now what should you do? What extinguishes fire? Water. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, if a person is angry, then they should make ablution. If you're standing, then sit down. If you're sitting, then stand up. If you're in a particular environment, take yourself out of that environment. लेकिन ऐसा उस वक्त पीछे ही ना होने जब तक पूरा अपना इसका नहीं होना चाहिए. This is not the way of a Muslim. This is not from amongst the teachings of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. और मेरी आखिरी बात. Third, yani cure. Number one was what? Spiritual reliance. Number two, practice and adopt patience. And number three here, I've written evil eye. Nazar.
Suratul Falaq or Suratul Nas Parana. And then the Asbab Nuzul regarding that particular surahs as well, them particular verses. And often nazar is caused by hasad. Imam Ghazali in their Bidayat al-Hidayah, we just finished that book with our year 3 students, part-time students. Bidayat al-Hidayah, beginning of guidance. Very good book to read for your own guidance. For your own guidance. Available in English as well. Bidayat al-Hidayah, Imam Ghazali. My last point here. That they mentioned that one of the illnesses of the heart is al-hasad. And hasad again devours good deeds just as wood is burnt by fire. Fire burns wood. And this is unfortunately again what we put up on social media. Doro zamana aisa na. What we eat we put up on social media. What we wear we put up on social media. The car that we drive we put up on social media. Ye gala na? Or is it just a Bradford thing? Everyone's guilty of this, right? And not just in relation to the dunya, in relation to the deen as well. To maaf karne ho saji, go live on Facebook. Muaja Sharif ke samne khate ho ji, taking pictures, making videos, bare peer hai sadakin ji, with their backs towards the Gumbad al-Khazra Sharif. Am tahbata a'malukum wa antum la tash'urun. Tabhi log naraz ho yaar, main kisi peen ke khilaf na. लेकिन वो जो गैर शरई काम है वो गैर शरई काम है यार. You wouldn't turn your back towards your own father. You wouldn't turn your back towards your mother. How dare you turn your back towards the Gumbad al-Khazra Sharif, where the Prophet ﷺ is resting, no matter who you are, no matter what you think you are. Be-adab, be-nasib, ba-adab, ba-nasib. So this is why control what you put out on social media. When it comes to our kids, we'll share pictures. Evil eye is a reality. We are in control of what's out there. You don't need to tell anybody and everybody about the good things that you have and the blessings that you receive from Allah Almighty. Rather, only tell those people who will wish well for you, who are your well-wishers. But that doesn't want good for you. Yes? And then when things go against us, that's when mental health issues begin to stress and anxiety and depression and so on and so forth. So be careful of what you put out there. You don't need to tell people that you're in the masjid. Our youngsters will take their phone out, Snapchat, taking out picture chicks and or caption this and what will they write? Rug life, not Tug life. No. Maybe our youngsters can relate to this. You don't need to tell people that you've gone towards Rug life now, and that you turned away from Tug life. No. These things are between you and Allah. And keep these things between you and Allah. And Allah Almighty will throw all of this back in your face. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. I end upon this, that Allah Almighty says what? Curse be upon those who pray. I'll say it again. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Curse be upon those who pray. Allah curses those who pray in the Quran. You might say, Imam, se kya bhai? एक तरफ दूसरा नमाज पढ़ो या अय्युहल्लज़ीना आमनु इस्तईनु बिस्सब्रि वस्सलाह इन्नल्लाहा मअस-साबिरीन. दूसरी तरफ Allah says in the Quran that he curses, but there's two reasons why. Two reasons that many of us are guilty of. Number one, that when we pray, Allah says what? That you are negligent, you are lazy, you are ghafil, sahmoon. The do namaz padne iतना chori होने जी. जरा मुश्किल वक्त is over. We passed our exam. The financial difficulty we passed. Then we say, oh, think about it next time. The same Jummah par ji hazri honi hai. No doubt Allah is Ghafoor Rahim, but that is not what Allah expects from you and me. The hukam is what? Pray 5 times a day. Aqimi salata, inna salata tanha lil fahsha'i wal munkar. So Allah Almighty curses those who pray. Number one, because they are lazy, they are negligent, they are ghafil. और ये भी है ना, हाफिज इब्न कसीर in the tafsir mentioned what? Another possible interpretation of why Allah curses those who pray under a sahun is that they leave their salah right in the last moment. Especially the Super Sunday, right? When you got 3 matches to watch. Especially if you're Arsenal fans now. But then you leave your namaz right in the last moment. This is why the most beloved deed to Allah Almighty is reading your salah upon His time. أي العمل يحب إلى الله هذه رواية الأدب المفرد में है ना. The first thing and the first riwayah, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was asked what is the most beloved deed to Allah Almighty. Tajdar in Medina responded by saying, As-salatu ala waqtiha. The most beloved deed to Allah Almighty is to offer the prayer on its time. And then the second reason why Allah Almighty curses those people who read it, Salah in the Quran, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. When they pray, they do it to show off, ostentation. Or we see and we feel the presence of somebody. This is why be careful. Be careful of what you put out there. Allah khair karo. Inna ne call idea wo kutha pahuncha diyo. Wa ma alayna illa al balagh. Hazrat dua Muhammad. Ni hazrat dua. Ni please. Manna tu sala hissa hoida sa. Tu sala hissa. Hazrat please manna.
آمين الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين اللهم أحسن عاقبتنا في الأمور كلها وأجرنا من خزي الدنيا وعذاب الآخرة فإنك أنت خير الحافظين اللهم ارحمنا فإنك أنت خير الراحمين اللهم انصرنا فإنك أنت خير الناصرين اللهم افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك فإنك أنت خير الغافرين اللهم إنا نسألك إنابة المخبتين اللهم إنا نسألك إخلاص الموقنين اللهم إنا نسألك توبة الصديقين اللهم إنا نسألك شكر الصابرين اللهم يا رب بالمصطفى بلغ مقاصدنا واغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه سيدنا محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين.
Did everyone understand the discussion? Badi jawab baat khali tabsre karo. Any question, then feel free to ask anything that you want clarity on, guidance, then we are here to answer your questions and concerns. Please meet Hazrat Sahib before you leave, and then inshallah we'll all
Yeah. Is that Facebook? Because I've been on Facebook. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, and you could. Yeah.